you all for coming this evening. It's a beautiful Monday night in Roswell, Georgia. And thank you for coming out in the elements to attend our meeting. Before we get started, I would like to say that Councilmember Wilsey is at home sick, and let's just hope she doesn't have the flu, and if she does, let's just hope she stays at home. So the first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I believe we've got some folks here from Heart Healthy Month that are willing to lead us in the pledge. So would you all please stand? Thank you. The next item is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tizer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the reading of a proclamation for Heart Health Month 2020. Whereas the National Charity League, NCL, is a national service organization comprised of more than 65,000 mothers and daughters in grades 7 through 12 who serve their communities in 254 chapters in 27 states. Whereas the Roswell Alpharetta chapter of NCL exists in our community with more than 200 mothers and daughters who are committed to the development of leaders and improving our community through service and volunteerism. Whereas NCL works in national partnership with the American Heart Association in recognition of the impact of heart health in our society, and whereas cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of men and women in the United States, and whereas about 80% of cardiovascular diseases may be preventable through lifestyle choices and changes. And whereas the NCL and American Heart Association have joined together to enhance awareness of heart health to improve and save lives. Whereas February 7th, 2020 is National Wear Red Day in observance of the fact that almost half of all cardiovascular-related deaths are in women, and cardiovascular diseases kill about one woman in every 80 seconds. Whereas the Roswell Alpharetta chapter has petitioned this honorable city council to proclaim February as Heart Health Month to increase awareness of the importance of heart health and the prevention of heart disease in our community in an effort to improve and save lives. Now, therefore, it be resolved by the City Council of the City of Roswell that National Alpharetta chapter of the National Charity League is hereby commended for its service to our community and dedication to heart health in partnership with the American Heart Association. And be it further resolved that February is hereby proclaimed to be Heart Health Month, so approved this 10th day of February of 2020. And thank you all for being here this evening, and I believe you've got a spokesperson that is willing to talk with us about this Heart Health Month.
Yes. Good evening, Ms. Mayor and Council. My name is Bella Smith. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight on behalf of the Roswell Alpharetta chapter of National Charity League. As a service group of mothers and daughters, our national philanthropy focus is the American Heart Association. Heart disease is such a critical issue for women, and our goal is to create awareness that we hope will lead to saving lives.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it for these ladies. And we would love to have a picture with you if you would all grant us that opportunity.
Okay. Just missed the whole thing.
Keep smiling. Right, stay like that for 1 second. So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, ladies. The next item on the agenda is the recognition of the City of Roswell receiving the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the FY 2020 budget from the Government Finance Officers Association. Mr. Luckett.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here this evening to recognize the dedication of our budget staff and within the Finance Department and their commitment to achieving excellence on behalf of the city. The city has received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association for the FY 2020 budget. This award reflects the city's commitment to meeting the highest principles of governmental budgeting. The award also affirms how well the city's budget serves as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and as a communications device. The city had to be rated at least proficient in each of these areas, as well as 14 other mandatory criteria. This is the 16th year that the city has received this award. Of course, I'd like to thank the Mayor and Council and our city administrator for your support and commitment to adhering to best practices when it comes to local government finance. And at this time, I'd like to ask our budget staff to stand and be recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luckett, and congratulations to the finance staff. We just mentioned it earlier in the budget work session. You folks are awesome, and thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for taking the leadership role in the city of Roswell and presenting such a fine budget. You guys are great. The next item on the agenda, and I'm very excited about this as well, is the approval of appointments to the Downtown Development Authority for 4-year terms. They are as follows: Ron Buckley, Michelle Seeger, Thomas Smith, Michael Thompson, Maureen Watley, and David White, and the reappointment of Trent Perry. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tizer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands, and it passes unanimously. And as I've said many times before, but the DDA in particular, this is a group of folks that have to do the heavy lifting here in Roswell, and we certainly do appreciate it. And we appreciate the fact that we've got Roswell citizens that are willing to step forward and do the work on behalf of the city of Roswell and for the DDA. So thank you all and those of you that haven't volunteered for a board or commission in Roswell, I would encourage you to do that as well. We're always looking for good folks. And so you can go on the website, put in an application, let us know what you're interested in, and we would love to have you join our volunteer team. The next item on the agenda is Admin Finance Department. Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 4 is the approval of an ordinance to adopt the amended and restated defined benefit retirement plan for the employees of the city of Roswell, and this would be the first reading.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend and restate the retirement plan for the employees of the city of Roswell, Georgia, in accordance with and subject to the terms and conditions set forth in the attached adoption agreement, any addendum to the adoption agreement, the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit Systems Master Plan document, and the GMEBS Trust Agreement. When accepted by the authorized officers of the city and GMEBS, the foregoing shall constitute a contract between the city and GMEBS, all as authorized and provided for in OCGA Section 47.5-1. Therefore, be it ordained by the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, and is hereby ordained by the authority thereof. The retirement plan for the employees of the city of Roswell, Georgia is hereby amended and restated as set forth in and subject to the terms and conditions stated in the following adoption agreement. In the addendum to the adoption agreement, the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit Systems Master Plan document, and the GMABS Trust Agreement. Except as otherwise specifically required by law or by the terms of the master plan or adoption agreement, the rights and obligations under the plan with respect to persons whose employment with the city was terminated or who vacated his office with the city for any reason whatsoever prior to the effective date of this ordinance are fixed and shall be governed by such plan, if any, as it existed and was in effect at the time of such termination. If approved, this will be the first reading.
Mr. Harner.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. This item was submitted by request of the Georgia Municipal Employee Benefit System. They administer our defined benefit, or more commonly known as a pension plan. As you may know, there's two different retirement plans of the city depending on when an employee started with us. So for those employees that started with us prior to March 1st, 2011, there's this defined benefit pension plan, and that's administered by the Georgia Municipal Employment Benefit System. They've recently resubmitted the plan, or restated and submitted the plan to the IRS, and as part of the conditions, they received approval, but part of the conditions is that each of the member organizations, including the city of Roswell and about 280 other municipalities across the state, must have their governing bodies adopt the plan. So that's why it's before you tonight, and again, next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Harner. Does council have any questions? No questions from council. Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one approach, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve item number 4.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tizer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Harner.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 5 is approval of an ordinance to amend Chapter 3, Alcohol Beverages of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Roswell regarding cigar lounges. This is the first reading. Mayor, I may have a conflict on this item, and out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to recuse myself from this item.
Thank you, Councilmember Tizer. And Mr. Tizer, if you're recusing yourself, if you would leave council chambers, thank you.
Mayor, I'm going to have to recuse myself as well.
Councilmember Judy, if you would leave chambers, we'll call you back in after the item has been heard. Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend Chapter 3, Alcohol Beverages of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Roswell regarding cigar lounges and for other purposes. Now, therefore, the mayor and council of the City of Roswell, pursuant to their authority, do hereby adopt the following amendment, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this would be the first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. As Mr. Davidson had mentioned, this is an amendment to Chapter 3 of the ordinance. This amendment will be to add a new definition for cigar lounges, and it will also amend Article 3.7, which is the requirements for the consumption on premises license regarding the cigar lounges.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Does council have any questions? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one approach, I'll bring it back to council. I'll be asking for a motion, and I would like to say before we accept the motion, I would like to say for the record that I do not support this. I have a fundamental issue with it, and this is a cigar lounge, which seems fairly innocuous. However, my question is, What would stop us from having Chardonnay and cigarette lounge? Maybe a Merlot and a marijuana lounge? And all of those things would be high-end and hand-rolled. And so I just see us on a slippery slope with this, and I will say for the record that I will not support it. So having said that, are there any other comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So just as it was controversial a few years ago when there was discussion of the craft beer and wine being allowed, I certainly was very supportive and very vocal that I support diversifications of business as long as they can follow laws in an orderly manner and really create a diversified opportunity of how we create destinations as well as potentially how we really hopefully increase really customers in Roswell and taxes if done in a manner that follows the law. And frankly, this is something that we've seen in both Alpharetta and Woodstock as successful and not creating disturbances or anything along those lines. This code that has been drafted is stricter than what is in both Alpharetta and Woodstock. So we absolutely are really creating some guidelines that absolutely hold any business to a higher bar. And again, with that, I want to make sure we are really just not becoming something where we just have nothing but restaurant after restaurant, and instead looking at different opportunities. And so for that reason, I will certainly be supporting this, keeping in mind that this council always has the opportunity to see if there's any concerns, any issues. Council can always readdress and refine in the future.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you let us know about the regulations and conditions that will be imposed to this kind of business?
There's a couple of different regulations that we can look at. Councilmember Zapata, for the cigar lounge itself, there are certain things they can and can't do. There's a list of 5 things that you see here that are not to be sold or permitted on the premise. Any of the vaping products, they can't do any of that. No cigarettes, no free tobacco or unrolled tobacco is allowed. It has to be something that's already in a handmade cigar. None of the hookah pipes or the bongs, if you will, as listed, and they can't be machine rolled. So the cigars must be the hand rolled cigars. They can only have 51% of their total gross sales according to state of Georgia tax receipts, and over 51% is from the retail, and over 70% is the total gross from the handmade cigars and any of the cigar related products. So those are some regulations for the actual cigar lounge. There are also regulations in regards to what they can do as far as their pouring license and the type of establishment that they have to create. And with that, they have to have a maximum capacity of no more than 40 persons, and that's based on the fire marshal's calculations. It has to be no closer than 100 yards of another cigar lounge. They certainly have to have a high filtration system that would exceed 98%. I'm assuming that's probably the air changes per hour, and then meet all the state of Georgia requirements for any of the indoor smoking. So there are quite a few requirements, I think, that go on, not only the building itself, but the products that they have to sell.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So what about hours of operation?
I don't have anything listed for that unless there's something in the actual legal definition. I'm sorry.
Mr. Davidson.
So none of our businesses or establishments can sell after 2 alcohol. As far as how long they want to stay open, that would be up to them. But they wouldn't be able to sell or serve any alcohol after 1:59, actually.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
These are considered retail establishments and not restaurants. I'd like to clarify that. That's a question. And then where the retail establishments, what zoning areas are they allowed? Are there certain limits from suburban residential? Those are my questions.
So this would be considered a retail, as far as where they're allowed? Jackie?
Ms. Dybel?
Yeah, this was great. That was my question.
There are no retail establishments allowed in our suburban residential character areas. We do, however, have neighborhood mixed use, which allows retail, which is somewhat close to the suburban areas. You have commercial mixed use, you have commercial corridor, you have commercial highway, or commercial heavy, and you also have the downtown districts within our historic district, which are downtown mixed use, downtown house, and downtown shopfront, which all allow retail uses. You also can do some retail uses in our office areas, depending on the requirements that we have set up.
Additional questions? Yes, Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you. This question actually might be either for Mr. Davidson or Ms. Dybel. So would we have the ability to make it so that this type of use cannot be in a parcel bordering suburban residential? Is that something that has the ability? Is that something that could be coded?
You could put it as one of the requirements here, not so much in the zoning ordinance, but it'd have to be a requirement in this part of the code, if you wanted to.
Mr. Fisher, did you have further comments?
No, ma'am.
Councilmember Zapata?
So back to the hours of operation, is this council thinking about anything about that, beside the alcohol regulation for operations, or is something that this council won't take into consideration, the hours of operation of a cigar lounge?
Councilmember Palermo?
I'd say I'm flexible on the hours of operation. So if this body has a recommendation, I'm definitely open to that. And also, I actually think curious to hear this body's thoughts on potentially, as just mentioned, limiting where it could not be on a parcel that's touching suburban residential. Curious to hear if any other council members have opinions on that.
Additional comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Zapata?
Thank you, Mayor. So what about like the hours of operation of liquor stores? Do we have any specific hour of operation for liquor stores? That we
Mr.
can match?
Davidson.
Perhaps we can match?
We do, but I can't remember what they are right off the top of my head, sorry.
So maybe I can suggest to match the same hour of operation of a liquor store. That would be something that I would suggest to add to the motion.
The other comment or question I have is regarding the historic district. I am adjacent to the historic district, and from what I gather, this could be next door to my home. So I'm not sure if you all want to look at those restrictions as well, because we are not all suburban residential. Additional comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
I guess I'd be curious to hear a recommendation from the mayor or staff on how to address that concern you just raised.
That might be a question for Ms. Dybel, if you can roll with the punches on that one.
Yes,
But also, let me say this is the first reading, so there is time to amend this before a second reading. I'm assuming that's where this is going.
So yes, as I stated, yes, it is where it'd be in the historic district. But also, I'm wondering if maybe you want to put some sort of requirement related to properties adjacent to something that's outside the district, if you're going to do it that way, that may not be suburban residential, but technically you fall under the suburban residential section in the comprehensive plan. So we'd have to take a look at the zoning. We can do that between the first and second reading. I'm not sure when the second reading is scheduled for. If it's scheduled for March 9th, we have some time to look at it and rework it. The 24th? Okay, so we'll have something done and looked at this week. Have it ready by Friday. We can do that.
If you need to, we can push that second reading out further, if that would be helpful to staff.
The city attorney is saying yes, so we'll go to March 9th. That'll
Our
work.
city attorney's out of town all next week, so I would suggest that
March 9th sounds fine.
Additional comments, questions from council? Did I ask for public comment? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? I apologize, I can't remember if I asked for public comment or not. I am not sure what's going on with the sound system, but can someone back in the booth please check, because the audience is not hearing us, and I know we have our microphones on. I know I do. And I know that the podium has been rewired. And it's hot?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Are there additional comments, questions from council before I ask for a motion? Do I have a motion? No?
Motion to move the first reading forward.
And did you want to consider any of the instructions for staff or the date of the second reading?
Yes, so basically I want to walk through all those things. So the recommended date was March 9th, is that correct? Is that staff's recommendation? So motion to approve item 5, moving the second reading to March 9th, and to update that the hours would be the same as alcohol stores, and then also that update that this cannot go in a parcel that borders suburban residential, and also update for staff to provide guidance on how to address the point that the mayor brought up earlier. Is that clear for staff?
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Zapata. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. If Councilmember Tizer and Councilmember Judy would like to rejoin us, we will go on to the Community Development Department. Councilmember Zapata. If you will give us just 1 second so they can come in.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zapata. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 6 of today's agenda, approval of RZ 202-2001-52/CV 202-00153, 10,980 Westside Parkway, Element Hotel.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item is Element Hotel. This was originally received approval from Mayor and Council back in March of 2018. They received design review approval in July 2018 and then had an LDP issued, land disturbance permit issued last May. As part of their work, as they began the site development, was to look at removing a retaining wall. The original approval had a 20-foot high wall running along the length of Westside Parkway. And so they looked at trying to redesign so that they could get rid of that wall. And this site plan change requires them to come back for approval as a change of condition, because one of the conditions was to the approval, or I'm sorry, to the site plan. So here's the property. It's located off of Westside, just north of Mansell Road. There are 4 changes to the plan. The stormwater is now above ground. The 19-foot retaining wall off of Westside Parkway has been removed. The number of rooms has increased from 91 to 108, and the middle parking lot section is a parking deck. This is the site plan that was originally approved. It's kind of hard to tell, but that black and white hashed line facing what's labeled as Old Roswell, but it's Westside Parkway, was where the retaining wall was located. This is the new proposal. By pushing it back and then kind of turning the building so that it has an L form where the bulk is now farther back from Westside, they were able to completely eliminate the wall. So from the hotel, there's the parking in the front and the handicap spaces, and then that middle, which is middle parking, which is accessed through the drive aisle and the private drive to the back, is actually a parking deck. And then there's a lower parking lot, and in the corner is the above-ground detention. Pushing the building back requires them to have a variance to the build-to zone. So instead of 55%, it is reduced to 14. You can kind of see where it was fronting, and then by turning it, there's only a portion of it. So we've dropped to 14%. The additional variance is to the parking lot landscape islands. The requirement is they're 9 foot wide. They're asking to reduce this. You can see in the landscape islands where there's some curving, which is mostly for fire access and other radius. And so at those areas, they're going to be less than 9 feet. Staff recommends approval with the following condition. Property must be developed in substantial accordance with the plan dated January 10th, 2020. Any questions for staff?
Does council have any questions or comments? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Yes, sir.
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, Ethan Underwood. I'm with the firm of Miles Hansford and Talent. Our Roswell address is 38 Sloan Street, and we're representing the applicant. We're here almost 2 years to the day, and this has been re-engineered and we think a better product. We do have a presentation that we think highlights the considerations. Thank you. As stated, we're requesting a 108-room hotel. The property's already zoned CC and was given a conditional use permit for a 5-story hotel. Again, just to emphasize the change in the shape, you can see the layout of what we're proposing with the building. This is a front elevation, so you can see where going from, I guess, from Mansell Road to the northeast along Westside Parkway, you'll have a cut into the hill, and as it goes north, and you have a lower elevation. This is a better illustration. It's currently zoned with the top picture. We've got a very large retaining wall. In fact, that was a concern. We originally came in, frankly, with some just absurdly high request for a 35-foot retaining wall. It was brought down to 19 feet at the recommendation of the Design Review Board. But since then, our client and their engineers have been able to engineer a design that the only wall that you will see would be the detention pond wall that you see on the very far right of your screen. And as discussed, we talked about an above ground detention pond. It's actually cut into the hill, so you'll still see a slope, but it's not just like it's a big open pit for the storage of stormwater. Again, for a build-to zone, really we've got kind of a funny shaped piece of property. You have to consider the entire length of the property, but because of the shape, you couldn't get a building as close as you would like to just because of the taper of the building. So we stated at the last presentation, approximately the red mark is where you really could square up the building. That's, we think, the appropriate area to measure it from, but with that, we are coming in less, so we have to get a larger variance to the Build 2 zone. And as stated, staff noted that we do have some difficulty in facilitating this design to get rid of the wall. We need some variances for the landscape islands. With that, perhaps, again, just for folks who were not on the city council at the time we were here last, it is a very high-end, it's a business class hotel. We're excited to bring it to Roswell. This actually shows a comparison with the Home 2 Suites, which is already constructed just to the west of the property. So you can see, top was the original proposal with the wall. If city council deems it appropriate and approves this, this would be the layout along Westside Parkway. It eliminates that tunnel as you're driving toward Mansell, where you've got the big retaining wall on your left side, if we can eliminate the wall that's on our right. But it's still coming in significantly lower than the Homes 2 Suites as far as finished elevation. So with that, we have LaCroix Engineering here to answer any technical questions, and we'll yield for our time for any questions that you have.
Does council have any questions for the applicant? Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
So about the retention pond landscape, do we have any specification on landscape that, will cover the retention pond, which I understand is up to 11 feet high?
Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Michael Toothaker, LaCroix Engineering, Project Manager, Landscape Architect on this job. Yes, I actually have a copy of the landscape plan that we've revised for the project. So this is our current proposal. It's actually very much like the plan that was originally approved, especially along Westside Parkway. The plan currently is to try to completely screen the walls that are going to be built for the pond. High evergreen plantings, a low shrub, shrub cover underneath the evergreens, the evergreen trees. Just kind of completely screen that from view. Really, kind of dress up that corner of the property.
Additional questions from council for the applicant? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? And I'll reserve rebuttal time for the applicant. Seeing no one come forward, additional comments, questions from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, motion to approve item number 6.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Tizer. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's move to item number 7. Approval of a conditional use CU 20194670 for vehicle storage located at 11265 Elkins Road.
All right, this is a request from Nally Lexus, which is off of Mansell Road. This will be vehicle storage for additional inventory. The applicant submitted in October. The neighborhood meeting was held in November and was heard by Planning Commission last month. Here's the location of the building. You can see its location off Elkins, just off Alpharetta Highway. There are currently 2 buildings on the property. The applicant is requesting to demolish both of these buildings to essentially set up a parking lot for their additional storage. There is also an access drive in between the 2 buildings that is an easement to the restaurant to the rear. Property is currently zoned CH, as are all the surrounding properties, with the exception of those couple of blue pieces in the north that's zoned office, and those are office condos. And the whole area is in the Alpharetta Highway, Highway 9 commercial character area for the comp plan. Here's the proposed site plan. You can see the access easement that would go back to that restaurant. And then the northern parking lot has proposed 106 parking spaces, and then the southern one has 67. And staff recommends approval with the following condition. The owner applicant will enhance the screening, including upgrading the current fencing proposal. and revised photometric plan as approved by an administrative design review. PC also recommended approval with this condition. Any questions for staff?
Does council have any questions? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So regarding the, this picture here of the current streetscapes, so I don't know if you can share there, and then I see, a few trees, and so are they going to respect the current or improve even the current streetscapes?
That's correct. That's what we recommend as part of the screening. So there's a berm, there's sidewalk, and then a berm. It's the elevation's a little higher than the street. There's a couple good trees out there, and what we'd ask as part of the design review would be some additional shrubbery. That's the screening condition, and then enhancing the fencing. So those trees will remain.
Thank you.
Additional questions from council? Seeing no hands up, would the applicant like to come forward and speak, please?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Ellen Smith. I'm an attorney with Parker Poe. And bear with me, we just moved offices last week, and I think my address is 1075 Peachtree Street Northeast, Suite 1500. I have the pleasure of representing the applicant this evening, and joining me tonight is Brian DePooley, the applicant's Director of Construction and Facilities, and also engineering expertise from Kimley Horn. But very short and sweet, the applicant owns Nellie Lexus Roswell and several other dealerships within the city, and they are looking to acquire this property, own it, and use it for their own vehicle storage. And as Kevin and staff have indicated, this is properly zoned. We don't need any variances to accomplish this. We would be tearing down the two buildings that are on site, maintaining the access to the restaurant, very important to get to the Mexican restaurant. This parking lot will be secured. We agree to the condition that staff has proposed with respect to additional screening. There will be no signage. This will not be a place where a customer can come and look at a car. It will be accessed only by dealership employees as they move vehicles back and forth from the various dealerships. So no signage, no real commercial evidence on the property in terms of an operation. I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have, but we respectfully request your approval of this application with the conditions that staff and the Planning Commission recommended, and happy to answer any questions. I will reserve the rest of my time as needed.
I have a question for you, thank you. Are you willing to make no signage and no customers on premises part of the conditions?
Certainly.
Thank you. Additional questions, comments from council? Seeing no hands up, and we'll reserve time for rebuttal. Is there anyone in the audience? Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Okay, so this is the same kind of microphone you have in the room 220, and I have to tell you, we can't hear a thing back there. This is for the live streaming, but it's not for the people that showed up in person. Just so you all know that. We can now hear you. We cannot hear one thing coming out of the remarks here at the podium. It's real clear for the people sitting at home in their pajamas watching it on TV, but for the people that took the time to come here, we can't hear you. Okay?
We'll look into it, Ms.
Thank you, but it's a little late. We got 13 items under the community development. So I'm here because I didn't realize this, but I remember when we first started putting all these car lots and used car repairs on Highway 9, and we rolled and we kneaded our hands and said, what are we going to do about redevelopment? It's just awful. And at one point there were 26 car lots between here and Holcomb Bridge Road. 26, because I counted them. And now when you go north of Holcomb Bridge, we have more car lots and more car dealerships. But that's not good enough, because Andretti's, which is now sold, of course, is full of used cars or new cars inventory. It looks like Andretti's is full, but it's a car lot. If you go behind the town center, the Mims property, there must be 500 cars being stored back there. So this is a great way to say Roswell is special on your way to go to Alpharetta to their fantastic downtown by passing lots and lots and lots and lots of car storage lots, because that's what you're telling people. That's our gateway up there, the north end of Roswell. Leave cool Alpharetta, everybody wants to use it as a model, and come to our used car lots. Welcome to Roswell. We could be Buford Highway, except they have ethnic restaurants and we don't. We have car lots.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one come forward. Any additional comments from council? Questions? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions. Is any traffic study how it's going to be affected, the intersection with cars coming in and out and trucks dropping and picking up cars?
No traffic study has been done related to how the cars would go in and out. Basically, the only people who are supposed to be going over there would be people from the dealership. So if somebody needs to go over there, they would drive, the person from the dealership would go over and drive the car over to the lot at Nally Lexus.
My second question, I guess, is for finance. Is this property subject to property tax of the inventory in the property?
Nobody from finance.
Yeah.
Currently, I would think.
I'm not sure about the inventory. I would assume that if they actually are going to move an additional 170 vehicles, the sales tax would be quite high. But as far as their inventory being taxed the same as property, it's without someone from finance, I'm not sure.
Additional questions from council? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve conditional use with the staff conditions.
And you're not accepting a condition that it's not open to the general public?
Oh, yeah, and the condition that the mayor added. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Councilmember Zapata.
The new conditions, too.
Staff, do you need any clarification on that? Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands, and it passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 8, approval of a text amendment with a regulating plan for changes to the Unified Development Code, UDC, Article 2, 5, and 8, due to the adoption of the Historic District Master Plan. This is the first reading.
Mr. Davidson. Sorry.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Article 2, Section 2.2.9.1, Article 5, and Article 8, Section 8.2, Historic Overlay District. Now, therefore, the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this would be the first reading.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the first reading for the text amendment related to the Historic District Master Plan. Some background here. The text amendment was heard by the Community Development and Transportation Committee on November 20th, 2019. It was initiated on December 9th, 2019. It was heard by the Historic Preservation Commission on January 8th, 2020. And it was also heard then by the Planning Commission on January 1st of 2020. The following are the changes that are going to be made in our code related to the Historic District Master Plan. So what section this is going into Article 8 and Section 8.2. Section 8.2 will be deleted and the new amendment will replace that section. This is the current section that we have in the Unified Development Code as it is today. What we're going to be going over, we have the purpose and intent, which will remain the same. Permitted uses will remain the same. Dimensional requirements will change a bit based on what we have in the text amendment. So what we'll also be adding to this will be a regulating plan. So this regulating plan will be establishing the setbacks and other items related to the master plan. If the regulating plan does not establish a setback, then the underlying zoning district will still apply. And as you know, those districts are downtown house, downtown mixed use, downtown residential, and downtown shopfront. This is the regulated map. I do have some areas zoomed in to help show everyone what this looks like for the historic district. This is the area on Canton Street. The hatched black lines with the numbers show a setback. As you can see, some of them are 10, 20, 45, 50. Depends on where the structure is sitting. We do have some that show 0. Those are the ones with properties that are currently at 0 at this point in time. This is a property here on Magnolia and Elizabeth Way area showing. This is Magnolia, Atlanta Street, Mimosa. Also again, Mimosa, Park Square, Sloan Street area, Mill Street area. This is Atlanta Street heading down towards the river. So what that map does, when the regulating plan establishes the primary or side setback, that is the setback on the property. If, as stated before, if there's no setback, then the setback that's currently in the code is the setback on the property. There's a landscape strip, and that'll be established, a 40-foot landscape strip along portions of State Route 9, and the landscape strip applies instead of the street setback. This is the section out of the master plan that talked about it. As you can see, it talks about preserving the wooded frontage along South Atlanta Street. The area in green, as you can see, is the 40-foot buffer, or a landscape strip, as you want to call it. It starts basically just before Warm Springs Circle. It is on both sides. However, the other side of that street is the National Parks area. So I don't see a lot of development going on in there since it's federal lands. The required landscape strip must be planted with native overstory and native understory trees as follows. As you can see, they'd be planted no more than 40 feet on center, and understory trees no more than 25 feet on center. Regarding the buildings, one item that came out of the master plan is to have a protected view zone. And this is related to the maximum facade and the building heights. This chart gives you the character areas, the types of building allowed, the facade width in the protected view zone, and then the height within the protected view zone. And I've got some examples that will show to give for people to understand what that means. Once again, here's the regulating map. So the protected view zone in the primary street right-of-way has a 40-foot zone, and in the side street right-of-way it's 25 feet. So you'll have the setback first, and then you'd have the protected view zone second. Here's an example of Mimosa and Bullock. So if you take a look, the hatched area is your setback. So if you look at the property on Mimosa that has the 90 feet on there, that would be the setback. The blue portion on here shows you the protected view zone. That's 40 feet. Within the protected view zone, you can build, but you can only build up to 2 stories. Anything outside the protected view zone and still on the property, you'd be able to build the maximum, which is 3 stories. Once again, here's the chart showing you the different sections. As you can see, the protected view zone, most of them are 2 stories. However, there are a couple of portions on here that do allow 3 in the protected view zone, and I'll get to that in a second. Here's another example. This is our example with the 40-foot wooded landscape strip. As you can see, if someone wanted to come in at some point in time and develop the apartments that we have down there, they'd have the 40-foot landscape strip in green and then a 40-foot protected view zone. And in that 40-foot protected view zone, you could do the 2-story buildings, but then after that, you'd be allowed to do up to 3 stories. Here's another example on Canton Street, showing you the 10-foot setback and then the protected view zone, 40 feet off of Canton and 25 feet off of Webb. The building types that are allowed in the protected view zone, these are specific to the character areas. So you may have commercial house building types, detached houses, attached houses. What they're going to look at is for the similar types of buildings to go in the certain areas. When the table, which as I've showed before, establishes a facade, then those facades have specific requirements in there. The facades are located on separate buildings and a minimum separation of 10 feet exists between all portions of the building. And the facades are located on a single building and at grade, open space with a minimum width of 10 feet and a minimum depth of 30 feet is provided. I'll show an example here. This is the best way to show what that means. So if you have one building and you have the separation, then you have the building here, but you can see the separation in the middle. Now ours is only 10 feet. This looks to be about possible 20, but what they do is they're showing it set back probably about 30 feet, and then you have the width across. This is the best way we could show what that section meant here in letter B. Facades are located on a single building and at grade with an open space with a minimum width. In our code, it says 10 and a minimum depth of 30 feet. So this tries to give you the best example of what that means. The step back in a protected view zone. So this is the portion I talked about briefly. In the protected view zone, on most of our character areas, you're going to see 2 stories. However, in 2 character areas, South Alpharetta, Atlanta Street, and the North Alpharetta, Atlanta Street character areas. These areas, you could do 3 stories in the protected view zone as long as in the 3rd story, between the 2nd and 3rd story, you have a step back of 10 feet above the 2nd story when the facade of that building is 80 feet or less. If the facade of that building is over 80 feet, then the maximum width in the maximum is 2 stories in the protected view zone. So what that means, let's take this picture for example. Let's use the pink building that's in the middle. Let's say that is 50 feet for a facade in width. And then they go up, let's say that's a 3rd story. They'd have to do a step back of 10 feet because it's less than 80 feet. But if their facade width was 85 feet, then they could only do 2 stories in the protected view zone. Once you get out of the protected view zone, you're allowed to go up to the 3 stories, which is permitted in the historic district. Here's another example to show you kind of like what a step back is. And then what we talk about here, and when you have a step back in this, kind of like if you have 2 buildings on the same property and they're behind each other and they're fully screened, you don't have to have the facade requirement. So if you have a property that's deep and you have a small little building with one, like a commercial house type building in the front, and you can do a commercial house type building in the back without a step back, as long as you couldn't see the property in the back from the street. And that's if you're standing straight in front of it. Currently in our code, we have a neighborhood compatibility bulk plain area. That is not changing. So if you have a property that has to meet that requirement, that is staying the same. The conditional use requirement for permits and variances and rezoning requests, and section 8.2.9 is a C of A. Applications for a conditional use, concurrent variance or rezoning, if they come through the process and they're located in the district, they must demonstrate conformance with the historic district master plan. This is still required per 13.7 of the Unified Development Code, so all projects still must receive a certificate of appropriateness through the Historic Preservation Commission. This is new. So what we've established in the master plan is to have some alternative compliance, which would allow for the Historic Preservation Commission to grant not a variance, but some alternatives. What this is, as I stated, is not a variance, but it provides relief related to an unnecessary hardship. And so this gives the authority to the HPC for the 5 items that I'm going to read here. It can modify a setback requirement in the historic district, including anything on the regulating plan, except for the area where the 40-foot landscape strip is required along portions of State Route 9. It can increase the principal building height, provided that that does not exceed the limits otherwise required by the UDC. It can reduce or eliminate the step back. It can permit a building type along streets that's not found on an officially designated historic building in the regulating character area. So if you have a section that says it has to be a commercial house, but somebody brings in an attached house, this would give them that opportunity to indicate that they could modify and use alternative compliance. And it can increase the maximum allowed facade width in a protected view zone. As I stated, alternative compliance cannot provide relief in the required 40-foot landscape strip. However, the applicant, when they ask for this portion, if they ask for alternative compliance, they must meet certain criteria for the historic preservation to approve that. There must be clear and compelling reasons that aren't purely financial as to why the standard cannot be met. The alternative design must satisfy the intent of the historic district. The alternative design must satisfy approval for criteria for the certificate of appropriateness. The alternative design approach must demonstrate exceptional conformance with the Historic Preservation Commission guidelines contained within the UDC. The alternative design approval conforms with the comprehensive plan in the Historic District Master Plan. And any appeals of the alternative compliance shall conform to the appeal requirements for the certificate of appropriateness. This is section 2. Right here is Article 5, and there's only a small portion in Article 5 that is changing. This section is staying the same. This is currently in the code. It has not changed. This is not changed, a little bit different. What they've changed here mainly in Article 5 is this section here, where you have added, prior to this change, you allowed cottage court to be a building type within the downtown mixed use and the downtown house districts. Currently, prior to last year, the cottage court building type was only allowed in downtown residential. The other major change within this section, if this text amendment is approved, is to remove the build-to zone requirement that is set in place right now in this district. So this will remove all the build-to zone requirements, and that the regulating plan with the setbacks will take its place. This section in Article 2 must be modified completely. It must be deleted. This relates to the build-to zone currently in our code. And once the build-to zone is, if this is approved and the build-to zone is removed, then this must be deleted since it relates to the build-to zone currently in Article 2. The HPC gave an approval with a change to the regulating map. They had one change. This section of Maple Street at Atlanta, where it shows the 20-foot setback and the 25, they felt that this should be a 10-foot setback. A lot of the properties currently being built there show 10 at the moment, and some of them are already 10 feet. So they thought that this would be appropriate for a 10-foot setback. That was their only change to this document. Staff recommends approval of the first reading. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the document as well. Do you have any questions for staff?
Does council have any questions? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I have more some comments I'd like to discuss. So again, as I mentioned the last time we discussed this public meeting, I think this is a fantastic project that shows really, I think, a lot of successful work from so many different volunteers and staff and in the community. So I think it's absolutely a phenomenal improvement, and really is going to do a lot to really protect and preserve our historic district and really enhance it. As I go through this, there's really just two items that I want to make sure this council is focusing on. And one of those items is the property on the corner that has a 0-foot setback on the corner of Magnolia and Canton Street. So to have a 0-foot setback and 5-foot sidewalks and multiple stories, which would be completely allowed if this was passed this way, then that is going to have a mass and scale effect of a Vickers, and I think that's exactly what this is. The whole purpose of this is to avoid. So I strongly believe that we need to increase the setback right there, both on Magnolia and Canton Street, to ensure that we're not setting ourselves up for a codified type Vickers right there. So that's item number one I want to discuss. The other item I want to discuss deals with, I believe it's the alternative compliance, which is, it's my understanding of and so actually if we have a property where we have a property that, say, is a 10-foot setback and allowed 2 stories, and if the HPC would now have authority to adjust that. And so it's my understanding the HPC could say, you know what, even though it's 10 feet and 2 stories allowed from this plan and approved by council, the HPC could change it to actually be 20 feet, so further back and perhaps shorter with 1 story. And the applicant would then have the right to then appeal that, which absolutely I think makes sense, and I definitely support their right to appeal something like that. My concern is then the opposite can also happen, though, is so if approved is 10 feet and 2 stories through alternative compliance, there is the opportunity for HPC to reduce from 10 feet to 0 feet and from 2 stories to 3 stories. And the way it's currently written, there's no appeal process for the community. So that's where I feel like we really need to level the playing ground and just need to ensure that if HPC is changing something that's within this plan and changing something that council approves, that there is the opportunity for a resident to appeal if it's impacting. And if you're wondering, even as this council is probably aware, I brought up at the initiation, I brought up my concern with the 10-foot setback or the concern with a 0-foot setback that I think should be more something along the lines of 10 feet. What I did not bring up was the alternative compliance and really this way to ensure a protection. This is actually based off of the Planning Commission. So I listened to the Planning Commission meeting in detail, and this was the reason why there were the multiple votes of concern for this one reason. So with that, I appreciate Planning Commission bringing that to our attention, and I think that is something we absolutely need to address.
Additional comments from council?
If I may, I'd like to address one thing there. We also, as staff, have talked about that after the Planning Commission, and since we know that most of our appeal sections is in Article 13 of the administration, however, as staff, we looked at that and thought that maybe related to the alternative compliance that, and we can discuss this with the city attorney between the first and second reading, as to possibly putting something in Article 8, which is where this is going, related to the appeals regarding alternative compliance. So between the first and second reading, we thought we would be discussing this with the city attorney as to see where we should put that section.
Thank you, Ms. Steibel. Additional questions, comments? Yes, Councilmember Judy.
So I'm open to discussing both those in between the first and second reading. I think shortly after getting elected, we pushed to get this done because we saw that one of the biggest problems and most divisive situations in the city was our historic district and protecting it to make sure we didn't have another situation. And I feel like we had a great model here. We had a unanimously, this plan was passed unanimously by the Citizen Committee, then unanimously passed by council to move forward. This is a model we can use when looking at our UDC, which obviously is our next goal of trying to figure out, what do we want, where do we want to go, comprehensively along with our strategic plan and comp plan, as to make sure we're getting all the information. Because when you put together a puzzle, you get a puzzle, it's one as whole. And when you start taking pieces out of the puzzle and adding to those pieces or subtracting from those pieces, the puzzle will never fit right again. So we need to be really careful when we start picking things apart like this, which were unanimously passed and data-based. So I'm willing to speak about it as we head to the next reading, but I want to make sure that we don't start picking apart a unanimously passed by our citizens program.
I would like to make a couple of comments. Mr. Davidson, if you could tell me what zoning, have you ever heard of a zoning ordinance that did not have amendments made to it?
No.
Thank you. And zoning ordinances are fluid documents. They, just by the nature of the beast, do require amendments to be made because they're enormous documents. Many times you can't see the unforeseen consequences of passing a document like that. So the other thing that I would like to say is while we are already actively working on a comp plan, we are actively working on a strategic plan, we are working on the census. We've got a lot of irons in the fire right now looking at the big picture. So yes, we are looking at it comprehensively. And the last thing I would like to say is that one avenue does not preclude the other. So in other words, if I could use the analogy, if I sliced my hand open and my husband decides to take me to the hospital, trust me, he's going to put a Band-Aid or wrap something around it until I get there. So I see both of these avenues as very viable. I consider that we are getting to the whole bigger picture issue with the strategic plan and the comp plan. We're going to master plan the Northwest Quadrant. We've got a lot going on. Our East Roswell Economic Action Committee is coming back with recommendations. So I just see both of these avenues as viable, and what I consider is a good path to go forward is to put a Band-Aid on the bleeding right now, but let's go to the hospital. Additional comments from council? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, yeah, I kind of agree with if the applicant can appeal, it's more than logical that the residents can appeal, especially when we are opening a door here called alternative compliance. So we're coming with a plan, but we're saying, wait a minute, but we can change it. So by opening the door of alternative compliance, I think it's more than fair to also give the chance to the residents to have the right to appeal to a project. So, and also I will support the 10 feet on the corner of Magnolia and Canton Street, the one we just discussed. So those will be two updates that I'll be looking into.
Additional comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Judy.
So while your point's well taken regarding the both plans and Band-Aids when necessary, I want to make sure we are using data and information that is well thought out before we just pull something out and throw it up. So I completely agree with what you're saying, and I want to make sure that we look at this hard on every one of these. And so you'll see tonight there's a lot of stuff on here that I will, likely pass through initiation to try to figure out, what's the right thing we should do. So it can go through Planning Commission and other things as we garner the information moving forward. That was my point in the situation. Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I think some great conversation here happening, obviously, on a very busy community development night. So what I want to point out is I agree with my fellow council member on. I think we have a great model for how this occurred with this historic district master plan. There's one detail, that history, that I think is important to bring up on a big piece that brought it about. Was what had occurred is about 2 years ago, I had a focus and a concern around setbacks within our historic district, and saw that there was really a big risk of changing the character of a historic district. So what I had actually brought forward was, to quote the mayor, who I agreed with completely for everything she said, to really stop the bleeding, to put in that there should be a minimum 10-foot setback. And unfortunately, at that time, the council was not willing to support that. However, what we got was actually a great opportunity and agreement that we should have a historic district master plan. And so I think ultimately what came out of this is fantastic. Interestingly enough, I was even bringing up at that time, is I said up here in the dais that I felt through going through this process, you'd find that it's actually typically be greater than 10-foot setbacks. So 10 foot was a very, very reasonable temporary compromise. And as we saw tonight, that was absolutely the case. But I think where we might have some disagreements, and I hope these disagreements don't create challenges, because I think we should all just be working together to bring progress. Where we have disagreements is just around the risk tolerance. 2 years ago, I wasn't willing to risk more 0-foot setbacks within the historic district. The majority of council was willing to take that risk, and luckily, I don't think there were too many situations or even any situations where that was an issue. So we lucked out. Again, I'm very risk averse, and it comes down to the same thing regarding there's a number of things here affecting multifamily and mixed use. I'm not willing to take the risk to lose more opportunities, and so I definitely, as the mayor said, I want to make sure we stop the bleeding. And at the same time, I love the opportunity for not only everybody on this up here in this mayor and council, but also the entire community to hopefully be getting involved, really providing great ideas, feedback, and this is really a chance for us all to work together to really improve our code and make sure that moving forward, really the city of Roswell is absolutely moving in the right direction. So again, some great sentiment and really looking forward to moving a lot of this forward.
Please come forward.
Hopefully this will work. My name is Claire Snedeker, 765 Whitehall Way. I want to applaud the elimination of the build-to-zone in the historic district and the creation of the meaningful setbacks, and particularly the establishment of the protected view areas. My only question is if I could get clarification on the rear setbacks and the compatibility buffers there. I guess what I think is the backside of Vickers and how that abuts a residential area and what it looks like now. So I wanted to know if we had changed that at all or made any improvements around setbacks or step backs or anything when there's a neighborhood property adjacent to one of these properties that's in the governed now by the HD master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Steibel, can you answer that question?
So the rear setbacks were not changing. Those were discussed at length during the committee, when the committee discussed it. However, they changed only the front and the side. However, we still have any type of buffers that might be required on properties, depending on their zoning and abutting any other zoning, and the compatibility buffer and the bulk plane. So if anything comes in and is abutting a residential area, they still have to comply with buffers and bulk plane. That did not change.
Thank you, Ms. Steibel. Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Additional comments, questions from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, thank you. So, motion to approve the first reading with 2 updates. Number 1, the 10-feet setbacks for Magnolia Street and Canton Street property, the one we just discussed. And the second is about the appeal process by any residents, not only by the applicant.
We have a motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do we have a second? Councilmember Judy.
So on the 10-foot on Canton Street, right now you have Rock and Taco that's there right now. Is that 10 feet back because it's in line with all the rest of the buildings or not? I don't know.
Ms. Steibel, can you answer that?
Yes, what I believe they're talking about, that zero, is the zero portion on the parking lot area, not in the buildings that are existing, because the buildings that are existing are basically at zero. So I think you mean the area where the existing parking lot sits. So if anything should come in on that property where the zero is, and then the portion that's still in pink before you get to the white shows the building. So I think that's where they're talking about the 10 feet, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yes, correct.
Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Actually, I just want to point something else different as well, is one of the aspects that I've seen affect the perception of the mass and scale deals with the proximity of the street, but also, and therefore, the size of the sidewalk. And so what you do have is, although you do have some 0-foot setback buildings here, you also have wider sidewalks, whereas in that would not be a requirement on this southern property. So that would give it a different look and feel. So I just want to point that out as well.
Councilmember Tizer?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify that I was there Saturday night, and that building is about 10 feet back.
Additional questions, comments from council? Clarifications? We've got a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 9, approval of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 10.3, signs, Section 10.3.10, wall sign. First reading.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Section 10.3 signs. Now therefore, the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Article 10.3, signs of the Unified Development Code, which is, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference. And if approved, this will be the first reading.
So there's some background on this. It went to the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting in November of 2019. It was initiated on December 9th of 2019. It was heard by the Planning Commission at their January 21st, 2020 meeting. And it also was discussed by the Historic Preservation Commission back in 2019. So what this is to change to the downtown shopfront sign area. Currently in our code, it says 9 square feet for a maximum size of a sign. What we're looking to do with this text amendment would be for the downtown shopfront sign area to go from 9 square feet to 32 square feet for buildings in that area with a store frontage of more than 30 linear feet. Any other building may have a wall sign of 18 square feet. Prior to the Unified Development Code, the smallest wall sign square footage we had in the city was 32 square feet. When we created the Unified Development Code, this section got a wall sign size of 9 square feet. So what we're looking to do is to just allow these buildings in this section to have 32 square feet or 18 square feet. The HPC did support this recommended change, and the Planning Commission did recommend approval at their January meeting. Staff recommends approval of the first reading. Do you have any questions?
Council have any questions? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one approach, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve item number 9.
Motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Tizer. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Councilmember Zapata.
Me again. Thank you, Mayor. So item number 10. Approval of the text amendment to Article 14, definition, Section 14.2, defined terms, alley of the Unified Development Code, UDC. This is a first reading.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Section 14.2, defined terms. Now therefore, the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Article 14.2, defined terms of the Unified Development Code, text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this would be the first reading.
Yeah, so what we're looking to do here is, some background. This text amendment went to the Community Development Transportation Committee on October 30th of 2019. It was initiated on November 12th of 2019. It was heard by the Planning Commission on January 21st of 2020. The proposed change is what you see in red on the screen. Currently in our code, the definition of an alley is a public or private thoroughfare which affords only a secondary means of access to abutting property. What we're looking to add to that definition is to state alley shall not be used as the sole access to a property. Staff and Planning Commission both recommended approval. Planning Commission recommended approval and staff recommends approval of this change for the first reading. Any questions for staff?
Council have any questions? Is there anyone in the public? Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Janet Russell. Immediately came to mind the historic Roswell Cottage, which is at the corner of Norcross Street and Highway 9. Their only entrance, now that you've made that alley, that East Alley project, which you blocked off their entrance conceivably because it's a one-way street, that's the only way for a car to get into their property. The only way. So you're saying by this that they cannot use that as the only access into their special event property? No, that doesn't work for me. No bride wants to park over here and be driven over there because remember, their van would have to go down the one-way alley and they can't enter there. They have to dump them off at the street. You have to think about unintended consequences, and that is a huge one. That is a special event facility used frequently all the time, generating lots of money for the city. You can't tell them that first you took away their entrance, you made it a one-way street, and now you're telling them the only little area where a car can drive in and park in front is now restricted to them because it's the only access you've given them into their building? No, no.
Ms. Dybel, could you tell us whether or not that piece of property would be affected and how it would be affected?
We'll take a look at that. However, technically, a property that's existing before an ordinance change would be considered grandfathered, and I can double check that with the city attorney. So technically, it's allowed because it's existing, and this ordinance has not been adopted yet. What this was to take a look at any properties that we had where there might be just a secondary access. We were looking at it mostly kind of like with townhomes, where they were coming off from an alley. That's really what this was based on. It was not based on anything within the historic district, because we do know there are a lot of small properties within the district that have specific areas. So, but anything that's existing prior to a code change would not be affected.
Thank you, Ms. Dybel. Is there any, yes, please come forward. And I would like to remind everyone to please state your name and address and fill out a comment card when you come forward to speak.
Sure. Kurt
you.
Hilbert, 600 River Bluff Parkway and 205 Norcross Street. This actually presents a serious legal problem because it takes out easements by necessity. If you have this sentence in there saying alley shall not be used as the sole access to a property, it actually would become an unconstitutional declaration, and it would eliminate possibility for easements by necessity. So the staff could talk about that perhaps.
Mr. Davidson, can you shed any light on this?
I'm not exactly sure what he meant by that. I'll talk to Kurt after this, but we can address it between the readings.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you, and I just heard Mr. Davidson say what I was going to ask is, I'm seeing this is the first reading, so my hope would be we're able to move the first reading forward and approve this tonight, and that question is answered prior to the second reading.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one else approach, any further comments, questions by council? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, definitely between the first and the second reading, we need to address the legality of this proposal and then how this will affect this particular property, the special event facility. Now in the future, I know it might be grandfathered now, but is any risk that this property might not be grandfathered and be affected negatively by this initiative?
Additional comments from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes. Motion to approve first reading of item number 10.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So now, sorry, I'm taking notes. So item number 11, approval of the initiation of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 4, Section 4.2, District Components, Section 4.2.1, Applicability.
Yes, this is the initiation of a text amendment to Article 4. Section 4.2.1 and Article 4 related to CX, which is the commercial mixed-use requirements. What we're looking to add is that this section would be under the applicability by adding the following language: that in the CX commercial mixed-use district shall require over 50% of the square footage of a development to be commercial or retail use. And so basically what that means is anything that comes in that zoning classification, the development must contain over 50% to be commercial use. Staff recommends approval of the initiation of the text amendment.
Council have any questions? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for staff about, I understand the Planning Commission last year discussed in a regular meeting this item. I don't recall exactly which day, and I understand that I would like staff to add on that they approve on a 75% minimum square footage. So I don't know if staff can help to remind us what was discussed on the Public Planning Commission.
Sure. Last year, we had a mixed-use text amendment that was discussed and went through the process. And on April 16th of 2019, it was heard by the Planning Commission. And at that time, they discussed 75% for commercial use within a CX district. So that was discussed and then forwarded on to the council. The council did not put a number in when they approved the mixed-use text amendment last year. I believe that was in July of 2019. But when it was discussed by Planning Commission, they did discuss 75%.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Judy.
As we head to first reading of this, I'd like to find some numbers on what currently exists in our CX when it comes to properties such as this, and kind of for comparison's sake.
So before the first reading?
Anytime. We've got 2 readings here, so
Okay.
we're all right.
Additional comments, questions from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Yes, ma'am.
Claire Snedeker, 765 Whitehall Way. Had in mind also these Planning Commission deliberations that I've heard over the last 2 years. And it's clear that the current words of the zoning code for mixed use do not accomplish the stated intent that's in the code of primarily commercial. and that the wording has to change, or else we will keep getting large developments that are primarily residential, if not 100% residential, like the one that's up the street from me. There's absolutely no commercial in that development that's mixed use. So I just would further request that these considerations be made to be over 50% to accomplish the primarily, if not up to 75%. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? Additional comments, questions from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. So my motion will include an update with the spirit of consistency from Planning Commission, April 16, 2019, regular meeting, recommendation of 75%. So I will make a motion with the update of 75% instead of 50%.
A motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise, yes.
So is he changing this to 50% or 75%, or just adding the Planning Commission recommendation as information? Wasn't quite clear on that.
Councilmember Zapata, would you please clarify?
So update to 75% from 50% to be consistent with the spirit of the recommendation we received on April 16, 2019.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Judy? Yes, Councilmember Tizer.
So a question for staff. Back during that time frame, we asked the question, were there any properties that you knew of that met that criteria? And if I recall, there were not. I'm supportive of this at 50 because it is in the CX zoning. But I think what you do when you get up over that number significantly is you will create places that are just uneconomical to build anything, and you'll wind up with nothing. And so while it's nice that somebody in April came up with a number that's 75, I think that it should have some bearing in economic reality. If that number is 65, if that number is 45, if that number is 62 and a half, I don't care what the number is, but there needs to be some economic reality to it, not just some number that comes through. So, my question would be, do we know of places that are at that number? Is it even economically feasible? Because I don't think the residents of Roswell want empty places that have nothing in them. And again, I don't know what that number should be, but if you want to make it 50, it seems reasonable.
Could you clarify for me, Councilmember Tizer, who determines economic reality? How is that measured?
So the marketplace is what they do, what people build determines economic reality. At marketplaces to what lenders will lend determines economic reality, and the marketplace for what people will go to and shop for creates market reality. It's a three-legged stool that has to be part of this. And so if there are places that are being built that are 75 and above, that's great. That's evidence that works. If there aren't, that's evidence that we may be creating a problem for ourselves. And so when I saw the 50, it seemed to make some sense. I think we could find places that do 50, but I think we're going to have trouble finding places, if I remember right, had problems finding 75. And so I guess what I'm trying to do is find a number that creates the kind of, that doesn't create a complete halt on the ability to create things that might be good for our city.
Thank you for the clarification. I would also like to point out that economic realities shift with the economy. I just went and heard an economist speak the other day, of which he advised that lenders are putting the brakes on as far as lending for apartments. So that will be a shift that will affect us as well. Councilmember Hall.
We need to set the bar for what type of development we want. If a developer identifies a piece of property and can't make it work, unless it's 70 or 65, they can approach us for a variance or a exception.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So, I mean, the interesting thing on this is, I brought forward 50%, over 50%, because that's the intent in there, and that's a number I support. And at the same time, as we look at if 75% ends up being the right number, it is the opportunity for the city to be showing what the intent is and what's wanted. I think, from an economic reality standpoint, yes, there needs to be an economic reality. At the same time, I think we've all seen a number of properties with 100% commercial. So this is having commercial mixed use show that what's wanted, what's intended is it's at least 75%. I say that just to bring up that I don't think it's completely black and white. I think there is a gray area. I think we do need to discuss really what is best for the community, what is best for incentivizing some redevelopment. My preference is that whether this moves forward from tonight with 50% or 75%, my hope is it's crystal clear to the Planning Commission that we absolutely want them looking at the number and discussing the number again, and perhaps they come up with 75% again. Perhaps they've moved it up to 80% or 60%. At the end of the day, I think there is a three-legged stool, but it's important that it's not the tail wagging the dog, and that we're setting up a code that's really what's best for Roswell residents.
We've got a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And is Zapata Hall in favor? All those opposed? It is Tizer and Judy.
I'm abstaining because, again, I think 50% and 70% are both such great improvements. I'd like to have a little more discussion, or I guess I would hope for a little more discussion, because ultimately... Thank you. Sorry about that. So my intention for abstaining...
Excuse me, Councilmember Palermo, we haven't finished voting yet.
Okay.
We have 2 in favor, we have 2 opposed, and I will support in favor because I would like to move this along to the Planning Commission. I think that the Planning Commission will have clear direction from us that that number is in flux, but also that number, it's important for them to consider all the variables. The motion passes. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 12, approval of the intention of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Section 4.2, 5.2, 6.2, district components to restrict multifamily units from the first floor of mixed-use developments.
Yes, this is initiation of a text amendment to Article 4, 5, and 6 in the sections of 4.2, 5.2, and 6.2. So what this would do is state the following language in each of those sections, and it would state no multifamily units shall be located on the first floor of a mixed-use building. So that would mean any mixed-use buildings that we have, if they have commercial and office, that would be on the first floor, and above those, the second and third floor, fourth, depending on what size and height of the building, that would be where you'd have the multifamily units. But on the first floor, you would not be allowed to have any multifamily units. The staff recommends approval of the initiation. Do you have any questions?
Council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Judy.
So, just like the other one, I would have supported 50%. I'm trying to get these through so we can learn some more about them, apply some data to them. I think that in this one, I've got some questions on, is this based upon a whole project or individual buildings? So if you had 2 buildings that were full of office and restaurant, and you had a building next to it that was all multifamily, and you had double the office and restaurant, but then would this force that one multifamily building to have multifamily, or sorry, no multifamily on the first floor, because this says all buildings. So that's one concern. The next concern is if you're able to do a building here, and you're able to possibly do it at 2 stories versus 3 stories instead of 4, this might push that building up one more to make it economically feasible. So I just like to look at this as let's get some more information in between initiation and first couple of readings to really nail this down, because I think there's some questions around how this works.
Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Henry. And I definitely always encourage and appreciate anytime we're looking at just for more information between readings, between votes. I think that's great. A couple things I want to point out is one, just similar to the primarily with the mixed use item we had. This is also really closing a loophole based on what the intent is, because mixed use buildings under, I believe, 2.1.1, it specifically mentions not intended for ground floor residential uses. So I think it is relevant that we're addressing this. As Councilmember Hall brought up earlier, there's always the ability to request a variance, and I think Councilmember Judy just had some, great comments there on examples that I think would be relevant in a council determining if there should be a variance or should not. I think it's something where it absolutely is something that should be publicly discussed. There should be the vote on it, but ultimately those are the types of discussions that should be had in deciding if a mixed use building should be allowed to have residential on the first floor. I don't think it should just be a given the way it is today.
Additional comments from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Kurt Hilbert again. This and the last one that was up, there has to be a rational basis for all of these updates to the UDC. And when you take a position where it says no, or come up with an arbitrary number for a percentage, you have to have some rational basis to do that. Otherwise, it's unconstitutional. I don't see anything that I'm reading up here that shows the actual rational basis for any of these provisions, nor the over 50% from the last one. So I would just encourage the Mayor and Council, before the second reading comes up, that you actually insert language that provides for the rational basis for this. Otherwise, it's unconstitutional. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Jim Walsh, River Terrace Development. I'd like to say that I'm very pleased and represent the people on the east side. I'd say that we're very happy to see some movement in this to go away from all apartments, etc. Also, I would like to say we'd like to see even an increase, as we've talked about, higher than 50, somewhere in between. And finally, I think that putting commercial on the bottom is a safety factor, as well as a good business sense of having all the commercial on the first floor and then residential above. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? Additional comments, questions from council? Do I have a motion?
So, motion to approve the initiation of the text amendment of item number 12.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Councilmember Zapata, after this one, we will take a short break.
Thank you, Mayor. So, item number 13, approval of the initiation of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 4, Section 4.3, Building Type Standards.
Yes, this is the initiation of the text amendment to Article 4, regarding the building type standards. So currently, what this is going to do is to remove the building types of the walk-up flat and the stack flat that are currently shown as allowed building types in the CX, the commercial mixed use, and the CC, commercial corridor, as building types. So what they're looking to do is to remove those two building types from those two zoning classifications. And so basically properties located within the Holcomb Bridge Road corridor area, character area, and the Holcomb Bridge, Georgia 400 and Holcomb Bridge node character area. So what they're looking to do is just to remove those two building types from those two zoning classifications. Do you have any questions for staff?
Council, have any questions? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no hands, the public? Okay. Seeing no hands up or anyone approach, Councilmember Tizer.
Yeah, I just would like to ask the question, does this include the Northwest Quadrant? And if so, should we rethink and potentially exclude that since there's going to be a lot of work done there as far as redevelopment?
This section does include the Northwest Quadrant because that is located within the Georgia 400 Holcomb Bridge node character area.
And Ms. Steibel, correct me if I'm wrong, but we would look at that while when we're master planning the Northwest Quadrant, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. A couple comments. First off, I'd mention that I would be supportive of excluding the Northwest Quadrant from this, knowing that through a master plan, it might be added or changed in some other way. But what I want to bring up is really a lot of the origin around this is to really level the playing field and eliminate a discrepancy between the east side and the west side, in the sense that a lot of the west side has the Parkway Village zoning, and a lot of the east side, of course, does not. It has these zonings, and so this is really eliminating that discrepancy. We received an email from the public today, someone in the public today, bringing up that there's also CH on the east side as well, and that's relevant as well related to this. So I personally think we should look at including CH to be added to this as well, for obviously for Planning Commission to review and the public to review with the multiple meetings remaining.
Two clarifications, if I could. The portion in the Northwest Quadrant where the apartments are not zoned CC or CX, however, the properties along Holcomb Bridge are. So if you want to include that, that is fine, but those properties are zoned, are multifamily zonings currently. There might also be an RTH for the townhomes. Regarding the CH, I'll check into that, but I believe I looked at the map and I don't remember any CH zonings along the Holcomb Bridge corridor, but we can check into that.
Thank you, Ms. Steibel. Yes, Councilmember Judy.
So just for the public, walk-up flat and stack flats are any kind of apartment?
Correct.
Okay, and this is during the whole, okay, so to understand better, I know during legal meeting we discussed when you're going through your comp plan and others, if this became a part of our zoning, there's a possibility that we could be looked at, since it's a major commercial corridor, and lose possibly a planned first designation or funding. So as we go into the next readings or down the road funding because of grants, et cetera. So I think that going into the next thing, I just want to make sure what we're doing here will hold up to future comp plans, et cetera, so we make sure we're putting the right thing in here.
Yes, Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'd like to, in the spirit of compromise, and to move this thing along, accept Councilmember Palermo's offer to leave Northwest Quadrant excluded. I think what the mayor has said makes sense, except that I think we need to do everything we can to encourage that development through that area. And so I'd like to leave it out we can address it individually as it comes up. But in the spirit of moving it forward, I'd like to see that happen, Councilmember Palermo.
Councilmember Palermo.
So from my perspective, I guess now that we got the clarifying information from staff that these zonings are not where the apartment buildings are, and these just are on the commercial corridor where there's not the residential uses today, I'd have concern with doing that right now. I think that could certainly and should be a discussion for the first reading, but I would not feel comfortable supporting that tonight without looking at the map and understanding more. I'm not sure where the rest of this body stands on that, but for me, I'm certainly open to the discussion and could see myself supporting it, but I don't feel comfortable doing that until I learn more from staff and see the map.
Additional comments from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. Motion to approve the initiation of the text amendment of item number 13.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hull. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. We will take a 15-minute break.
Thank you, Mayor. So, item number 14, approval of the initiation of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to delete section 10.1.6.b, building constructed prior to 1959, and amended section 10.1.6.6.c, buildings constructed since 1959.
So this is an initiation of a text amendment to section 10.1.6, buildings constructed prior to 1959. Currently in the code, letter B indicates that section, and letter C talks about buildings constructed since 1959. So what we're looking at here is to delete section B, and then basically to reword section C, which would then become B. So right now we're at the initiation phase. So what we're looking to do, instead looking to state in B would be to say the change of use of any building built prior to 1959 located within the historic district is required to meet the parking standards that are indicated in letter C below, or pay into a parking fund as established by the mayor and council by resolution. And then letter C would, that portion that states buildings constructed since 1959 would be deleted, and it would just state parking requirements for downtown. And then the rest of it would remain. Do you have any questions for staff?
Council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I have a couple. So obviously I see here clearly shows the change of use. So it's my understanding that if a building is currently a pizza place and turns into a sandwich shop, it's still restaurant, same number of parking, there's no change. But instead, if it were to go from retail to a restaurant, that's a change in use, and that's where this would come into play?
That is correct.
And it's just the incremental amount of spots necessary?
That is correct. It would be the portion, so right now in the historic district, under the parking requirements, retail and office is 1 per 300 square feet. A restaurant currently is 1 per 150 square feet. Hold on. Let me double check that. Since there's different requirements in the historic district, I think I just indicated the normal parking space requirements and not the historic ones. So 10.1.6. Here we go. Okay, so currently, I was incorrect. So currently, except for restaurants currently in the district, all parking space requirements, so for office or retail, it's 1 per 500 square feet, and restaurants are 1 per 300 square feet. So if somebody changed, and let's say they had a property that's currently used as retail, and that went out of business and a restaurant wanted to come in, they would be required to meet the restaurant section based on the square footage. So if they had 4 parking spaces but they need 6, they'd be required to add in the extra 2. Does that make sense?
It does, and I actually have two additional questions. So number one is, so parking fund, costs, those details, are those something all that can be handled, that would be covered under a resolution?
That's what this is contemplating, yes, so that should be fine.
Okay. And then here's my other question, so related to that. So therefore, if this code were to, if this ordinance update were to eventually pass, then that's an ordinance separate. There's a resolution which goes through a separate process, but related to this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so I understand it's possible for the parking fund, the details of the costs, those things to be in a resolution tied to this. Now, what happens if in the future this council were to decide that related to this, they wanted a ratio applied? And what I mean by that is let's say by moving from retail use to restaurant use, they ended up actually having to come up with 5 incremental spots. So they either had to produce the 5 spots or pay into the fund for those 5 spots. I'm wondering, is it possible if this council in the future decides that they actually want to do a proration of that or some other number related to that. So in other words, they want to do half, 75%, 150%, whatever that number might be. Would a future council be able to determine that under resolution, or is that something that would be determined under an ordinance update?
By this, it looks like it would require the ordinance update on letter C.
Okay.
Additional questions from council? Yes, Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm opposed to this the way it's set up right now. I think it's bad law. I think going back to 1859 is probably a bad standard. You know, a lot of things have happened since 1859 that are different. You know, 60 years ago in 1959, we didn't have things like rideshare. I'd venture to say that a significant number of people who come to our restaurants come by rideshare. I think that's a great thing. It cuts down on drunk driving, cuts down on a lot of other issues. My problem with moving this forward right now is multi-fold. Number one, I don't think that, I think staff needs to come up with the recommendation and needs to find the data of what those ratios should be for a restaurant versus a whatever else, based on new technologies and things that are occurring today that have changed what happened 60 years ago. I also think that there's some huge missing pieces here that make it very difficult for a planning commission to look at without a recommendation coming from staff. For example, who pays into this? Is it the owner of the building when it changes use? Is it the renter that changes use? This fund doesn't exist at this point, the parking fund. The use of the fund doesn't exist. It's just not very transparent to people to understand, you know, what we're moving forward. And so while I think there's a place that I could support this, I'd like to send it back to staff and ask them to bring it back with a little bit more meat on it before we send it to a planning commission who just doesn't have the resources to do the kind of work that needs to be done on this. Now, having said that, we can cram this on through tonight and pass bad law. I would hope that we wouldn't do that.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, you know, taking on the point of 1959, I'm pretty sure we didn't have serious parking issues in 1959 like we have today. And we do have parking issues. Probably in 1959, they didn't have parking issues. So, and this is a measure to mitigate part of the already problem we have in this area for parking. So, and I think it's more than fair and transparent to propose a parking fund to resolve a parking issue on a specific part of the city. So I think that in terms of fair and transparency, a parking fund accomplishes that. So, and definitely will help to mitigate the 2020 problem we have with parking in this area.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. So I think there's some important clarifications on this. So this is actually an issue that was not caused in 1959, but this was an issue that was caused, and I believe was it 2009? So it was 2009 is actually where this issue was caused. So actually any of the restaurants in our downtown that were actually came about prior to 2009, they were required to come up with the parking. And they weren't offered the opportunity to pay into a fund. It was they had to come up with the parking or they were not allowed to open as a restaurant. And then what ended up happening is this ended up passing. And so what have we seen? What we've seen is an unnatural demand created for restaurants because restaurants have a higher use of parking. That's why in our code we require more parking within the code. So then you have this unnatural demand. And so what have we seen? We've seen so many of the different other uses all turning into restaurants because of this increased demand. So I think it is important we address it. When we actually brought this up over a year ago, I believe it was, and the majority of council decided not to move forward with this. And we have multiple places that were retail turning into restaurants. And I am concerned with the sustainability of a downtown when you have this unnatural demand created, because it's doing two things. One, it's creating less diversity of business. And number two, it's adding strain to an already strained parking situation. So if you're just adding more and more places that use more parking than their previous former tenants, that's really a recipe for just continued strain. That being said, I think there are some good points that were discussed and some clarifications that would be helpful, but I actually think the fact that there's not a resolution currently is actually helpful for this situation. What I think is valuable and important is we don't want to kick this can down the street for months and then just really lose out on more opportunities and get more strained parking. And at the same time, the council, in addition to the fact that if this passes tonight, it has to go to Planning Commission for public comment and giving staff time to produce more information for Planning Commission. And then, if I'm understanding correctly, Mr. Davidson, does it come back for both first reading and second reading?
Yes.
So those are additional opportunities of when it comes back. Those are times when this council could decide to defer. This council could decide to make changes. There's a lot of different options the council has, and that's all separate from the fact there needs to be a separate resolution that's going to govern a lot of this as well. And I'm absolutely supportive of making it so that this ordinance does not go into effect until not only, if a second reading passes, but also does not go into effect until there's a resolution that's been passed. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to make sure we get this to be the best possible law that I think is going to really help enhance our downtown and really preserve the sustainability. And I think there's just a lot of time for good community input and for us as a council to work together. And frankly, I think some of the concerns I heard, I think were legitimate concerns. I think ride sharing is a lot more common than it was in 2009. Obviously a lot more common than 1959 and 1859. But I think we're going to continue to see that grow. But that should not affect this ordinance. What that should affect is our parking ordinance. Because what that should affect is, does every single one of our buildings have the right parking requirement? That's a legitimate question that I fully support staff looking into and staff reporting back to us. All this is saying is whatever staff and therefore council and mayor ultimately approve or deny, whatever they say is the parking requirements, then we just make sure that we're not creating unnatural demand for the highest use parking, the highest parking uses, which is restaurants. So I want to make sure. I heard a number of legitimate points, and I just want to make sure we're not clouding them together.
Councilmember Tizer.
I'd just like to just to reiterate, this is bad law based on bad premise.
Additional comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Judy.
I think that there's got to be some data behind this. I don't know that downtown based with a lot of restaurants, which I'm glad people want to put restaurants and fill empty buildings and do business here in Roswell, is unsustainable. I haven't seen any data that says that's unsustainable. Do we have a parking problem? Yes. Do we know where this money for the parking fund's going to be spent? Is it going to be put in a fund for an eventual parking deck? Is it going to be put to pay rents for parking spaces? That takes all of us to agree on that, which is tough sometimes. So I think that there's a lot of questions to be answered. There needs to be some data, and I also think we need to ask the restaurant owners and the people down there and the retail that's there that are in these 1959 buildings, or the owners and folks, and say, hey, look, what do you feel about this? I think doing stuff in a bubble because it sounds good is not what we need to do. We need to make sure, again, we back this up with data, we know it's unsustainable, and we move forward with a better product. So I don't think I can support this tonight. If it came back in a different form with more data, I could.
Let me make a couple of comments because I've been putting a great deal of thought into this recently. I know that it was suggested in a committee meeting that we form another committee to look at parking on on Canton Street and in that area. That's what the DDA is for, and we just appointed new members to the DDA. I would suggest that we charge the DDA to look at the parking situation and the possible remedies of that. And I think that that's a conversation we should have sooner rather than later, because the DDA needs to know what we're expecting of them. We originally reconstituted them a number of years ago because of parking. They were charged. That was the very reason why we sat the members of the DDA, was to look at parking. Now, that hasn't been done, but like I said, we've got new members of the DDA. I think that this should really be something that they look at, and that's exactly what a DDA is for. Councilmember Palermo.
Great, thank you. So a couple things I want to mention is one of the things was said, we should talk to the restaurant owners. So I've heard from 9 restaurant owners representing 10 Roswell restaurants that have all specifically asked for us to bring this back. Again, it did not pass a year or two ago, but they've asked to bring this back because it is an issue, and timing is an issue because it is a long process. It needs to go to Planning Commission. It needs to come back for a first reading. Then it needs to come for a second reading. When you have a retail location exit and it turn into a restaurant, it can never go back from this parking situation and this unnatural demand that we've seen. So we do have timing of the essence. I absolutely want to make sure DDA is weighing in on this, but what I'd encourage this council to consider is 2 aspects. One, if it passes tonight, it still has months before this council decides to approve or deny this. That will give the DDA a chance to kind of get on board and start discussing parking, looking at a lot as well. And also, what I want to bring up is all the question marks, et cetera, is under a resolution as well. So that's more opportunity to make sure that all different parties are included. And again, just the fact that if we decide, let's wait for the DDA, let's just wait till we have perfect data from staff, that will be months from now. And just like I said a year ago or 2 years ago, whenever this was, we will see more and more retail places purely turning into restaurants, and that's exactly what we've seen. And we're going to see more of that. So now is our chance to at least take a step forward to decide later if we want to change it or not. And this council might decide from Planning Commission and more information, we might decide at the second reading, we don't want to move forward with this, and that's fine. But I'm asking this council just to consider giving it a chance and moving it forward for more discussion.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't see this as curing unnatural demand. I see it as government overreach. Bad law based on a bad premise. I really think that the mayor has hit it on the head. The proper venue for this is the folks at DDA. I think the solutions for a lot of the parking issues, especially this one, can come from them, and it can come from them at a much more rapid pace than it could come this way. Again, it's not about curing some unnatural demand. It's about government overreach. It's bad law based on a bad premise.
Well, let me just say this. While I would recommend that this go to the DDA because it's a perfect fit for this and the other parking issues, I do not consider this to be government overreach. We are correcting a wrong that was done in, 2009? And the powers that be at that time decided, and you've got to remember, these were all houses. These were residential homes. When I first moved to Roswell, Canton Street had it was only the south end of Canton Street that had any commercial space in it. These were all residential. So as these have been converted into restaurants or retail, and each one of these restaurant owners signed a waiver about their parking when they went through the process. And now we are expected to correct it. So I'm just saying that, yes, we do need to correct this course that we're on, but I would prefer that it go to the DDA. Councilmember Hall.
I look at this as a loophole, and that this is something that's just putting people on a more equitable scale.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I don't see this as a government overreaching, especially when we have all these restaurants coming to City Hall and asking for parking solutions. So they are coming to us for us, hey, help us with solutions. So it's not us getting to their business, it's the restaurant owners coming to City Hall demanding or asking for parking solutions. So, so that is, here is one of many different parking solutions that we can offer. And many people will tell you that it's more than fair that, that the parking fund is created. So I don't see this, and especially, you know, that is a great opportunity to start, initiate the conversation. It's many steps that we have to go forward, and now even, you know, a new DDA members can get into this discussion and give an input or recommendations to Planning Commission and Council. So I think that initiating this discussion is very important. It's very important to have this open discussion, public discussion, and going through a process that is going to allow us to have many different feedback and information.
Public that would like to come forward and speak. Yes, ma'am.
Janet Russell, Roswell resident. So let me give you a quick brief history, 2.0. In the 80s, the city spent $2.2 million to clean up Canton Street. We buried all the electric lines, we put in new water pipes, we took out the old ones, which were wood, and we fixed it up because the people of Canton Street wanted it fixed up. So we did, at $2.2 million 80s dollars. I don't know what that would translate into in 2020's dollars. It was still residential with what we needed: a grocery store where the antiques market is, a fabric store, a beauty shop, a children's shop, a lawyer, a clock and repair shop, another little grocery store, where we went to go. Okay, I'm not saying that history is fabulous, but it was where we went during the day and the evenings. And then a few restaurants appeared. There was a tea house. There was a couple of other things. And then back in 2000, the early 2000s, this city decided they would put a focus on restaurants. And I got up at this podium and I said, before you do this, you need to take a look at the tourism value, and you need to create a percentage of what will be daytime visitors versus nighttime drinking and eating visitors. Fast forward to 2020, and we hear the complaints from the restaurateurs that they don't have enough business during the day. Well, duh. There's nothing to do there if you don't drink in the daytime. There's nothing. I heard this at an event I was at last Friday, or earlier this week. There was nothing to do. Fast forward, we're losing business, but you go to get in a restaurant and they're all full. Now, yes, some do ride sharing, but back in 1865, I think they barebacked ridden on a horse. They didn't have to worry about parking. They brought the buggy with the horses, because I remember a man that used to ride down through here on a horseback in the 70s. I'm not talking 1870, I'm talking 1970s. So now you've got a problem that you created, and so I did a quick summary, and there are 418 parking spaces here. We have overflow parking now at the library, which is allowed after hours. We have the parking lot at the Hagen lot, which we pay $4,000 a month to, for after-hours parking when he's closed for the offices. That's $4,000 a month, not a year. We pay $400 a month to the Roswell United Methodist Church. You have on-street parking on Mimosa. You have Green Street parking. You have probably 800 parking spaces for these locations. It would be interesting to see what is the maximum occupancy of all those little restaurants and bars that are on Canton Street. Because surely if every person drove in their own car and didn't car share, there would probably not be 800 people in those restaurants. So somebody's numbers aren't gelling right. And I'm tired as a taxpayer of coming out and bailing out that street. It's a nice street. I recommend it to people. But stop asking the rest of us to pay the freight. The city created the problem and we have a solution. If people are too damn lazy to walk across the street, that's their own fault. They'll walk at the Battery, they'll walk on down Peachtree Street, they'll walk in Midtown. So the city's obligation is not to fund parking for them, in my opinion. And I know what my solution is, but the DDA is not it, because I remember when the DDA was charged with transportation before, and their solution was to clear cut this property, take down the war memorial, and create an event space. That was their solution to transportation. No, God so loved the world, he did not send a committee to save it. Think about that one. We don't need one more committee. People are fed up with supporting the restaurants and bars on Canton Street because it's like the focus is on them for every single thing. Sorry, there's a new restaurant being built at the north end of Canton Street and Woodstock. That's a new building. I don't know how they arrived at 1959 as an arbitrary date. Why not 1948 or 1963? Who came up with 1959? I don't know. But is that building going to be adherent to new parking? Or because you haven't passed this, do they get to scoot in under the old one? Because it's the previous mayor that's building that building on property that doesn't have enough parking for a restaurant. It's got a law office, it's got another house, it's got another restaurant. There's no parking. So something's wrong somewhere, and the people of the city are tired of putting up with it and all this discussion. That's the end for me.
Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Good evening, Council. I'm Claire Barnes, Roswell, Georgia. Roswell's kind of been, the city's been kind of the trough of milk and honey for these restaurateurs and merchants for a long time. And the city is paying, we're paying, our tax dollars are paying for all these 800 lots like she's talking about, Bob Hagan's lot, all these other lots. The restaurateurs are, they're not paying their fair share. The city of Alpharetta has this parking fund. And I asked Michael Woodman, who's a community development person up there, talked to him last week, what does this money go to? It goes to maintenance, it goes to paving, it goes to a lot of different things. It's what this money for the parking fund goes to, that our city, that their residents aren't having to pay for. So I don't understand why we feel, y'all keep making excuses defending the property owners up here. You keep allowing them to come back to the trough of milk and honey and give them what they want. And they're blackmailing y'all. I mean, they're threatening to leave. Let them leave. Maybe a good store comes there instead of the restaurant. Free enterprise, let it take precedence. Let them have put together something like a valet service. Let them, let free enterprise, let them start being responsible for their own destiny. And, if they can do something like that, they've got 800 parking spots. Valet everybody. Let them pay for that. There's a lot of different things that if you just let free enterprise take its course and quit shoring these people up, and maybe we'll get more stores and different things in there if they can't make it, There's other things in town. We've got Woodstock now. We've got Marietta. We've got Alpharetta. People are going to other places now. Canton Street's not the only show in town anymore, and hasn't been for a while. And there's a lot more diversity for a lot of these other places, plus a lot of shops and a lot of different things to do. That they're not coming necessarily to Canton Street anymore. It's not the only act in town. So, y'all got to quit acting like the trough of milk and honey and tell these people to grow up and let free enterprise take precedence. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? Additional comments from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. So motion to approve the initiation of the text amendment of item 14 with the update recommended by staff to use change of use instead of reuse.
We have a motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it's Zapata, Hall, and Palermo. All those opposed would be Tizer and Judy. The motion carries.
So let's move now to item number 15, approval of the intentions of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, Article 11, Section 11.4, Streets, 11.4.1, Intent, letter F, subsection 3, for properties that contain multifamily units to require 8-foot multi-use trails.
So currently, currently in the Unified Development Code, under section 11.4.1, letter F, we indicate when installation of sidewalks is required, sidewalks shall be 8 feet in width for parcels with this frontage along the following commercial roads: State Highway 9, Crossville Road, and Holcomb Bridge Road. Later this evening, from Transportation, you will see a section added to this also. So what this portion would be to allow, add into, this would be number 3, since Transportation's was a little ahead of ours. They're just after us this evening. To state that an 8-foot multi-use trail shall be required for all properties that contain multifamily units. So this would be for new developments, or if one got redeveloped. However, anything that's out there now, we would not go and ask them to update. But if somebody new came in with multifamily that went through the process, they would need to show an 8-foot multi-use trail. Do you have any questions for staff?
Questions from council, comments?
I think I'm right on
Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So as we had discussed at committee when this passed unanimously, it's really just that ultimately we have multifamily buildings are of course the densest in our city, and it's important that there's really walkability, the increased really pedestrian safety and activity, as well as this has an impact on mass and scale. So for those different reasons, for around the walkability and creating that type of just better experience, I think this is a helpful amendment as well.
Councilmember Judy?
Is this for all sides of a building, or is this just on the main thoroughfare?
Ms. Steibel?
This would be located on the main thoroughfare. So let's say something's comes in on Alpharetta Highway. It would be along the main section, as I believe, or maybe we are looking at it for all sides. I guess technically this is initiation, so you can make that decision if you'd like, for it to be on, if it happens to have 2 street frontages.
Thank you, Ms. Steibel. Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you. It's my understanding this would be on all public roads, so not necessarily surrounding a building, because potentially you could have a parcel where it's not a public road separating the 2 parcels and they have a smaller sidewalk, but or basically, I guess a better way to illustrate that is the exterior of the parcel. So therefore, if you'd have one on Holcomb Bridge Road and another road, that ultimately it's surrounding the parcel was my understanding.
So basically this, as the deputy director just indicated, yes. So if you had 2 roads, public roads, then this would be on both of those.
Councilmember Judy?
So I think this is what I was trying to get at a little bit earlier. So if we're talking, Holcomb Bridge, obviously, we just basically said there couldn't be any multifamily on the Holcomb Bridge corridor. So when we're putting multiple things in like this, it'd be help to know what applies to what, because then we've got 8 foot. I don't know. I'm good to going through this. I just got a lot of questions heading into initiation on this one.
Additional comments from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Seeing no one approach, do I have a motion?
Yes. So, motion to approve the initiation of the text amendment of item 15.
Motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously.
Item 16, approval of the intention of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, Section 13.4.3, who can submit an application, letter E, regarding multifamily requirements.
So this is section 13.4.3, currently in the code, who can submit an application. We would be creating letter E under this section. It would basically state that multifamily shall be allowed as a conditional use in the following locations within the city of Roswell. On a parcel of property which borders Georgia State Highway 9 or Georgia 140 east of Georgia Highway 9 or Highway 92. On property where multifamily developments exist today or has an approved plan as of January 1st, 2020. The second portion would state if neither of the above locations apply, multifamily would be allowed within the historic district and no more than 8 units per acre, or outside the historic district within a mixed-use development where the square footage of non-residential uses are greater than 75%. Now, as it states in the beginning part of letter E, all portions of this would be a conditional use. So I wanted to make that clear. On numbers 1 and 2, it does say that under letter E, but the bottom paragraph is part of letter E. So no matter where something is, whether it's in the historic district or outside the historic district, all of these, anything for multifamily is considered a conditional use. And that's current in the code also. We can update the language to make it a little clearer if need be, but anything with multifamily in it is required as a conditional use currently in our code, and it would still be in our code. You have any questions?
Councilmember Judy.
No, I'm thoroughly confused. So everything is already conditional, correct? And this is saying, or sorry, everything that's multifamily is currently conditional, correct?
That's correct.
And this is coming in and saying that it's still multifamily, I mean, still conditional?
Yes.
And then the bottom part, I guess, is where the meat is. How does that fit with our historic district master plan?
Well, the master plan is more about design and setbacks and everything else. So a multifamily development would still be required as a conditional use.
Correct.
That doesn't change, not with the master plan.
So is this really changing anything?
Well, it's basically indicating where multifamily would be allowed to be requested in the city. So you'd only be allowed to request a multifamily project on a parcel that borders Highway 9 or Georgia 140 east of Highway 9 or on Highway 92. Or on a property where current multifamily apartments exist today. Also, multifamily could be allowed in the historic district as a conditional use at no more than 8 units to the acre, or outside the district as a conditional use, as long as it was part of a mixed-use development where the square footage of the non-residential portion of the mixed-use development is greater than 75%.
So the stack, again, I think we're putting a bunch of things in. I mean, at some point, will you just say no multifamily anywhere except these places and greater than 75% in the whole city? Because what we're doing is we're passing 10 of these that all say all the same thing. And then again, we're looking at a 75% number that I haven't seen any data that says that's, the number. I think we're really confusing this whole situation. We're putting a bunch of layers on something where it could be really simple. If the goal of this council is to put multifamily only in certain areas within this whole city, then let's just say that rather than putting all these different things on top of it where people have to guess what it is. This one kind of gets me because I'm not really sure with all the other things we passed tonight why this needs to go through.
Additional comments from council, questions? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Do I have a motion?
Yes. Motion to approve the initiation of the text amendment of item 16 with the following update to clarify the last paragraph here on a screen. Where it said, so multifamily will be allowed as a conditional use within the historic district, and then, or outside the historic district as a conditional use within a mixed-use development. I will update to add the as a conditional use in this paragraph.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it is Zapata, Hall, Tizer, and Palermo. All those opposed? Councilmember Judy, the motion carries.
So we're moving to item number 17, the last of my list here. Approval of the initiation of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Section 12.5, Stormwater Management, 12.7, Flood Damage Prevention, 13.2, Review Authority, 13.14, Enforcement Authority, and 14.2, Defined Terms.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just as some background to remind you, what we are bringing forward tonight is an update to the stormwater ordinance. Because of the way that it is written into the code, there are multiple sections that are referenced in the text amendment that is requested to be initiated tonight. This was originally brought to the Community Development and Transportation Committee in November, asked for some additional information, and we brought that back in January. However, before we did, on December 4th of 2019, the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District adopted a new model ordinance, and the city is required to adopt that ordinance sometime in this calendar year. So we brought that back to a committee and explained those changes to you. So this evening, I'm presenting the model ordinance as well as staff's recommendations for some additional text amendments associated with adopting that model ordinance. Just as a reminder, the UDC Section 12.5 is related to stormwater management, and it does have the purpose to protect, maintain, and enhance public health, safety, and welfare of our residents and properties, as well as to establish minimum requirements in order to control adverse effects of increased post-development stormwater runoff. The model ordinance, the following slide explains the applicability of the model ordinance as it's written today, and that is for new development, redevelopment, or linear transportation projects that include over 5,000 square feet of new or replaced impervious cover, as well as any land disturbance over a total of an acre. Common plans of development are usually seen in these. These are going to be our subdivisions or commercial properties where you have multiple parcels associated with the same development. There are also some hotspot land uses based on chemical uses that would be requiring stormwater as well. One of the recommended changes that staff has presented to you is to add an additional applicability, and that is to include runoff reduction requirements for the threshold that's under the 5,000 square feet that's referenced in that top bullet. So it's between 1,000 and 5,000 where runoff reduction would be required. We typically refer to this as water quality, and this would apply to all properties in Roswell. The model ordinance does include some exemptions. That includes emergency repairs by local, state, or federal agencies, trenching for utility work, stormwater management or environmental restoration, again, by local, state, or federal agencies, and repairs to existing stormwater management facilities. It also includes exemptions for agriculture and silvicultural land management, except for when there are new structures that would require the compliance of the stormwater ordinance. ADA modifications to existing structures would be exempt, as well as if a city linear transportation project is able to determine that the inclusion of stormwater management facilities would actually not be feasible. There is a process that goes through. Staff has recommended an additional exemption, and that is for existing driveway replacement in kind. And what that means is if it's a hard surface to a hard surface, as long as it's in the same size and same location, if they have a driveway, then we want to allow them to be able to maintain that because they certainly need that over time. Some other additional recommended changes to the model ordinance, or some enhancements to it based on staff working internally with our partners in the Environmental Public Works Department, is to include information related to off-site regional or shared stormwater facilities. That is a program and a policy that's managed by Environmental Public Works. We want to make sure that it is referenced as an option in the code, as well as clarifications on roles and responsibilities between our two departments. There are some things that community development is responsible for making decisions on, some where they need to be a partner in that decision-making process, and some where they are the responsible party. It depends on whether we are in design, construction, or in the maintenance period of time on a project. And then there's some definitions that were included in the model ordinance as it was approved, and we want to include those with the model ordinance in the 12.5 section so that those are tied together. Some other changes that are because of, again, the way that the UDC is written. The floodplain administrator is actually referenced in Article 13, Ordinance Administration and Enforcement Authority. But because of the changes we want to make to that, to make sure there's clear lines of authority between the departments of Community Development and Environmental Public Works, there is a minor change in 12.7 to give that responsibility to Community Development to the engineering director. In 13.2 and 13.14, which covers the review and enforcement authority, again, those responsibilities are being amended to reflect what was agreed upon by the departments in 12.5. And then for defined terms, 14.2, there are a number of terms that were included in both, and we want to make sure that they're only in one location unless it applies to the whole UDC. So it's just some minor changes to make sure that that is more clear. Staff does recommend approval of this initiation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Does council have any questions? You've been very thorough, thank you. Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the initiation of the text amendment of item 17.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Tizer. All those in favor, please raise your hands, and it passes unanimously. Now we are on to the Transportation Department. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. This is approval of the initiation of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, Article 11, Section 11.4, Streets, 11.4.1, Intent, Letter F, Subsection 2, to require the construction of multi-use paths as recommended by the Roswell Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan.
Oh, sorry, Mom. No, you pushed the DVD.
It was. I'll start. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the last initiation for a text amendment this evening. On December 9th, 2019, you approved the city's first ever bicycle and pedestrian master plan. In your packets, page 18B, you see a map that was in that plan. What we're asking you for tonight is for inclusion of that map into the UDC. Specifically, as soon as we can get the screen running again, we are asking you to include a letter B in subsection 11.4.1F. The color is a little bit difficult to see on the screen. The text at the top up through F1 is the current text in the UDC. The proposed revision we have is number 2 in red. I'll read it. Along the routes identified as locations for multi-use paths, also referred to as spokes or planned spokes, as included in the Roswell Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan's map titled Roswell Hub and Spoke Cycle and Pedestrian Network Map. I am placing that map on the screen. It is difficult to see on the overhead, but it is in your packets. I'll draw attention to a couple of the roads. This map does go into enough detail to show you which side of the street the yellow line is actually on. The blackish green lines you see are where we currently have trails already in place. So for example, you'll see that the trail on Woodstock Road is on the east side of Woodstock between 92 and Crabapple. You'll notice that the trail on Pine Grove is on the north side of Pine Grove from Lake Charles to Canton Street. You'll also see that on Hardscrabble, we show the green line existing on the south side from King to Etris. We're proposing to switch that from the south to the north at King and run it on the north from King to Target. This was a committee item that you remember talking about a couple of weeks ago. At this time, staff is pretty confident that that will be the easiest and cheapest path forward. But as we told you last week, we will be revisiting that once we get into more detail with a survey and utility relocation costs, and we will be presenting you a concept plan once that is in place in the next several months. One other point I'd like to bring up for you tonight. This is new. Staff was myself, Planning Manager Dave Cox, and Jackie Dybel, where we're discussing these text amendments. And what we'd like to raise with you is another additional staff recommendation on this item. The current UDC language, as shown on the previous slide, requires 8-foot trails. Believe it or not, a standard best practice for transportation facilities in all of our manuals actually show a best practice of 10 feet. The graphic you see on the right, 11.4.1D multi-use trail, actually shows an adequate width of 10 feet that is narrowed down to 8 feet. We regularly do this. Our standard is 10 feet. We would narrow to 8 where we have challenges like topography or utility relocation or needing to do a wall. So what we would like to introduce here to see if there's support would be to modify the above language in section F, where instead of saying 8 feet in width, we would refer to 11.4.14D multi-use trail instead of the hard 8 feet in width.
Does council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So as I said before, again, just really appreciate all the hard work that transportation staff did, all of staff, and really the community for putting a lot of focus on this and really kind of narrowing in on what the network should be. So great work. I definitely appreciate staff bringing this forward. A couple things. One, first off, with staff's recommendation right there, a request regarding how to word it and where to point to it in the UDC. I am comfortable with that, so that's something where I certainly support staff's recommendation. With it, what I'd ask is, it came with a number of different examples. It is a little late. This is just the initiation, but something I'd like to ask staff and for the liaison to consider as well for Planning Commission to think about as well is, I was educated at the committee meeting on hardscrabble. The fact is, in the plan it showed on one side, but staff saw that actually there were a number of feasibility reasons and why it made sense to be on the other side, and it's something that made sense. I had a number of different questions because I was kind of surprised by some aspects, but that's something I would like to ensure is being done on the whole network to see where it makes sense, and different examples of factors that I see, and I'm sure staff could think of more as well, but different factors are, number one, the residents that could access it, just making sure that it's getting the use. And an example is, if this council approves, if the neighborhoods, most affected would be interested, certain opportunities for getting more golf cart trails to, say, a school or business area or something like that. That's an opportunity that's created and something that should be considered. Also, something that should be factored in. I see you have black lines where the multi-use paths have already gone in, but I think it'd be helpful to understand where they're approved, where they're going to be going in, things like that, because basically, if we end up having, certain portions where a multi-use path is already approved and in the process of getting started, something along those lines, it's increasing the feasibility, it's lowering the cost to be putting the multi-use path there. So that's something I think is important. And then lastly, as we had discussed, just understanding, are there challenges? And I think it was a good exercise we went through discussing really around Pine Grove, because on one side, there's a portion where there's a big challenge, where there's an argument to make it on the other side. But then actually it turns out on the other side, there's perhaps an even bigger challenge somewhere else. I think that's a healthy exercise to go through, and I think that should be gone through more. Retaining walls, big, ravines, whatever it might be. So these are some things that I would ask if staff would look at, and I would hope that Planning Commission could be having a look, and there could be a discussion as well on the sides and those factors.
Additional comments from council? Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward and speak? Do I have a motion?
I have a question. I'd just like to be clear on the two things that we are going to add to the motion for the initiation, to include subsection B, and the other one is to modify section F to refer to 11.4.14.d instead of 8 feet. Is that correct? Or, oh, there it is.
So, in your item, as written, we're asking to add a section 2 to 11.4.1F to read as in your packet and on the screen. That brings in the actual map from the bike ped plan into the UDC document.
Then I make a motion to initiate this text amendment to the UDC Article 11, Section 11.4, Streets, 11.4.1, Intent, Letter F, Subsection 2, to require the construction of multi-use paths as recommended by the Roswell Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan as proposed, with this additional language.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Clarifying point by Councilmember Palermo.
Mr. Del Ross, does that include the staff recommendation, or is that separate?
I would refer that to Councilmember Hall.
That includes the staff recommendation.
We've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Mr. Davidson.
The only item I have is a recommendation for closure to discuss personnel litigation and real estate.
Do I have a motion for closure?
Motion to close.
Motion by Councilmember Hall. Do I have a second?
What if we're all tired?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. We are adjourned.